Hey, welcome to the Energy Question with David Blackmon. We're here on the floor of NAPE, a very vibrant and well-attended NAPE conference. You can just feel the energy in this room. It's really amazing. I am here with a couple of folks from my favorite trade association in Washington that I did a lot of work with back in the day. Dan Naatz, the Chief Operating Officer at the Independent Petroleum Association of America, and Mallori Miller, the VP, Vice President, Vice President of Government Relations. She's the poor soul who has to go up to Congress and deal with all the politicians. What fun! How are y'all doing today?
We're doing really well. Thanks for having us.
Doing great, David. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's Dan came into IPAA. We were just talking 2003 when I was actually active with the association and doing some work. And so I've known Dan for 21 years. It's just phenomenal to me, all the work IPAA does on behalf of its members, which are usually, the smaller mom and pops, all the way up to the big independent producers in the United States. And it's just a phenomenal service to the industry that you guys provide.
Well, David, thank you. We really appreciate it. It's always been a pleasure working with you. And, IPAA really is. Our average member company is still 20 people, 25 people. Yeah. We have member companies in 34 states. So we really are the face of small business, and we represent larger companies, but it's really that what is still drives the industry is that the smaller producers, the people are willing to take the risks and look, and that's our job in Washington on the regulatory front, on the congressional front, is to fight and be the voice for that. And it's a pleasure, always a pleasure every day to represent them.
Yeah, that's going to be harder to do, isn't it?
Yes, it definitely is. There's a number of challenges in DC right now, but it's good job security for us.
Well, it is that. It's good job security for me too. It provides me all kinds of material to write about every morning. But before we get into the issues, let's first talk about the fact that IPAA is, in a large way, very responsible for the amazing show we're seeing here on the floor at the George R. Brown here in Houston. You guys have been a major part of this since the beginning, right?
Yeah, we were one of the original partners of NAPE and still are. And, we have always been a big participant in NAPE. And again, we thank our leadership, the folks who took the risk again to get out there. We were talking to Bruce Vincent, who was just put into the Hall of Fame.
Great oil and gas guys.
And he was saying it was a risk, right? And they met over at a hotel, basically a small room, and hoped that folks would come to talk about prospects, to talk about the industry at a time. We're also talking to one of our other member companies that said when the industry was really in a tight spot, 92, and he said he was describing that it felt good to be in a room where you knew that there was some light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
And NAPE's always provided that. NAPE's always provided the opportunity. So we're thrilled to be here and thrilled to be still a part of it.
Well, you mentioned Bruce Vincent, who was the president of Swift Energy for a long time, and really great guy, one of the great oil and gas guys here in Houston. Are you familiar with Doomberg, the cartoon character? He's a fantastic economist. He writes. He's actually the most popular Substack account related to energy. I interviewed him this morning. He was talking about guys like Bruce, guys like Deaver True, we were talking about earlier, and he was just going on and on about. Those are the folks that are heroes. And I completely agree with that. The people that take the risk, and invest all this money and their personal fortunes into providing energy that we all need are really American heroes. And it's kind of a shame more people in the public don't really understand that.
Well, I think one of our challenges is that we're not very good at tooting our own horn.
Well, it's always been a problem.
And I think that also plays into part of our challenge in Washington is, we are an industry that likes to just get things done. And we don't do as good of a job about talking about, some of the societal benefits that we bring. So I think.
Yeah. And you know why, right? Is because the people that run these companies really are the people who understand the business. They're engineers, they're geoscientists, they're business people. And they come to the office every day wanting to go out and drill wells and produce oil and gas. And I was in the position kind of like you guys are inside the companies, having to go in and talk to these CEOs and say, well, you know, need to spend a couple $100,000 talking about this and talking about that. And you just can't believe the blank stares I would get from some of these great people. Loved them all. But man, it's a tough job to convince them. You really have to do a better job communicating.
You know, David, the only other thing I would add is so often then the thought is that the technology always blows me away because these are smaller companies, but they're engineers. They care about protecting the environment. They obviously care about being in compliance with all the regulations, and they're all often the ones that are taking the risk. And so one of the things we always fight, Mallory's exactly right. Our guys don't shoot their horn enough. Sometimes even I'll still tell them to say, you can do that. And they'll say, we've been doing it for 5 years. I mean, that would be helpful to know when we're talking about the industry in Washington, because too often it's still, I think the thought is it's, you know, just this kind of willy-nilly. These guys are unbelievably professional, and it's really important for the nation and the economy.
It really is. I wish we could convince more people in Congress of that. You represent small producers. And EPA has just finalized this new Quad O regulation on emissions. Talk about the impact that's going to have on some of your smaller producers, especially the ones that are producing marginal wells.
Yeah, I'll be happy. So, you know, it's an enormous issue, and management of methane is really important. We understand our members. So often, though, this coming from Washington, the thought is it has to be Washington that dictates. The states have a robust regulatory system in place. So one of the things we're saying is let that play out. But what the administration is doing with the Quad O is going to have a huge impact on our members. And at some point, the challenge is to make it so that they can still produce, because the government regulations get so onerous, so complicated, so that at some point you can't do it anymore. And especially in marginal wells, which are really important. So we're going to continue to have a discussion, but at some point you say, what's the administration really trying to do here? And we know. So,
and I think one of the big challenges too is the cumulative impact of all of these regulations that we'll have. Obviously, we talk about the Quad OA, but also, you know, the methane tax that was passed in the Inflation Reduction Act a few years ago. And
thank you, Senator Manchin from West Virginia.
And you know, if you talk to him today, he regrets that, and he's not running again. He's not running again. So it's the cumulative effects, and the SEC trying to regulate methane. You know, that's what's really going to impact, especially our members, the smaller companies. That's the layered effect of all of those together, and especially when a lot of them, there's different regulations in each one. They don't always necessarily jibe together either. So.
And the only other thing I would say is so prescriptive. I mean, one of the other things that's amazing about the industry is there's a number of ways you can get at it. We want to stress again, we understand methane is important. You've got to get it, but the industry can do it so many different ways. But anytime you write regulations, then you're handcuffing these guys who are the innovators. So let's get at it. And that's why so often the states are not softer regulations, but they understand their basins. They understand what has to be done. And that should be the way it is instead of a top-down approach from Washington.
And that's such an important thing. And of course, it's always been, a big piece of the advocacy at IPAA to push the enforcement down as close to the people as you can push it, right? Because they're the folks who really understand the business. They know the people of their state. Right. And instead, they want to do everything from this, these central office buildings in Washington, D.C. And it's all these people who have never been to Poteet, Texas, and never met anyone from Texas, probably most of them, who have no understanding of what's really happening out there. Whereas someone from the TCEQ in Austin can jump in a car and be in Poteet in 2 hours. And really talk to people and really understand the impacts of what they're doing.
Yeah, it's interesting. There was a congressional hearing in the Energy and Commerce Committee just a few weeks ago talking about how some of these regulations are going to impact small producers. And one thing that I thought was really interesting, helped get a witness from Michigan to testify. And he said, I have a wonderful relationship with my state regulator. I can call him up on the phone any day. We have excellent communication, and they understand what's going on in the state of Michigan. So it's a lot easier for me to work with them in that framework than it is from a federal approach.
Yeah, it really is.
To achieve those results, right? I mean, that's the goal, to achieve those results. You mentioned Beamer True in Wyoming. And I've had one of our other Wyoming producers say, look, Dan, I was born and raised here. Wyoming is in my blood. I would never do anything that's going to harm the state, right? So it's that when Washington speaks, they don't understand that. Just what you're saying, it's that local flavor. So we feel very strong about it, but it's going to be a huge issue we're going to have to continue to battle with.
So what else are the federal regulators working on? You know, I know they're feverishly trying to get everything done as soon as they can before the election, just in case their man doesn't get reelected. What else is coming down next?
Oh, you go.
Well, my jurisdiction, I've handled a lot of federal land issues and also offshore. We have a pretty robust offshore contingency within IPAA. So there's just an onslaught of regulatory issues coming down the pipeline. BLM is also trying to regulate methane venting and through their venting and flaring waste minimization rule. That should be finalized. It was supposed to be finalized in January, so it'll be finalized hopefully, or well, not hopefully, but it will be at some point soon. And, you know, there's just a number of different regulatory issues. ESA has been a big thing that the Fish and Wildlife Service has
Endangered Species Act.
Endangered Species Act. This is the 50th
Center for Biological Diversity.
This year actually is the 50th anniversary of the passage of the ESA. So the Biden administration has put a big push on trying to make that a hallmark of their administration as well. And I think one other thing that, you know, you mentioned the speed of that they're trying to get these regulations out. You know, we're getting dangerously close to the look back period for the Congressional Review Act. So any regulation that is published within 60 legislative days of the end of an administration can then be looked back at by Congress in the next Congress. And they could potentially undo those rules. So I know that the administration has their eye on the clock and they're watching what's coming out.
And speaking of that, explain to folks how few legislative days there are left. We're sitting here on February 8th, recording this 9 months before the election, 10 months before the end of the year. How many legislative days are actually left on the congressional calendar as it sits today?
Well, it's hard to predict because they can always change.
Well, I know, but
my goodness, you know, August, they're going to be, I would say fewer than that, far fewer than that. Yeah. I mean, in a typical week, there's only 3 to 4 legislative days because, you know, so
there's recesses and other. It's a great question though, David, because Mallori said to me not long ago, she follows it far more closely than me, 60 legislative days. And I was like, okay, what's that, April? And she's like, no, wake up. It's legislative days, Dan. So it's pretty far back.
And we're in an election year. So August, October, you know, those months are pretty much, Yeah,
I mean, we're getting probably by April or May, you're probably going to be at it, right?
Right, David.
Yeah.
So it's, so there's going to be this frenzy of new regulation. I think what this means coming out of all of these agencies and these companies, you know, the big companies, the Exxon Mobil's, the Devon Energies, have a big number of staff people who can deal with all that. But a company with 20 employees might have one.
Right. No, it's really key, and it's what we always talk about, and it's why we're there, and it's why we were founded to represent those small producers. But you can see the push to make it very difficult for smaller producers to get out and operate. And you know, we've talked about that so many times, but it's such a dynamic industry. You have very small producers that move, or you talk in the offshore. There's small producers push the other. It makes it competitive. It gets the other. It makes everybody better. Number one, it helps the economy, it helps jobs. And so the frustration is that the government, through government regulation, tries to push those industries out, and it makes no sense. It really doesn't. When you're talking about the industry, independent producers who really launched the shale revolution, which has changed the world, right? I mean, it really has. You know better than I, David. It really changed the world, and that's not being dramatic when you're talking about what's happened in Ukraine, in Russia, in Europe. It's unbelievable. So really frustrating, but that's our job, and that's why we've got to get down and get after it.
So what do you think? I mean, you have folks who are big natural gas producers to want access to the international markets, particularly when Henry Hub's sitting at $2 of MMBTU. This pause on LNG export facility permitting, how big an impact is that going to have, do you think, assuming it gets lifted in 10 months as the administration claims it will be? I mean, is it going to be a big major impact on our industry here in the United States, or is it going to be something that kind of is temporary and will recover?
Right, Mallori?
Well, I wouldn't, first of all, I would not believe that it's going to be lifted in 10 months, I think.
I mean, you always have to caveat that.
I think it's definitely going to have an impact for sure. I think our companies need access to those international markets. And it's sad because this policy is just completely politically driven at this point. And Biden seems to think that he needs to do that to shore up his environmental base. But there's no real reason for it, in my opinion.
No real business reason, obviously.
No, and David, I think the other thing is the message it sends to the world is devastating. I mean, the unreliability of American natural gas, and not from our side, but from the government side, and the federal. Right. So if you look at what's happened in the world, again, even post invasion of Ukraine, it was U.S. LNG that kept this going, and now the message is that we're going to look at this. We're going to stop exports, and it's so politically driven. Again, I will say, I was talking to somebody earlier, the Washington Post editorial board, not an opinion piece, the Washington Post editorial board said it's an awful idea. When the Washington Post editorial board says it's a bad idea, it's a bad idea. So we're looking for allies. We're talking to folks in Congress, both Republican and Democrat, to do something because it really has implications far beyond the short pause that we're talking about.
And you talk about that Washington Post editorial. I read that with fascination because, honest to God, it read like something I would have written.
Correct.
I mean, every argument I used against that at Forbes and at the Telegraph, the Washington Post used exactly the same argument. So this is a very clear-cut issue and a very clear-cut a bad idea. And also from a financial standpoint, right, because it can take years to raise the capital. And these are $10-12 billion projects. It doesn't take a few weeks to raise that capital. It takes years in some instances.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
And I was just going to say, having the certainty to get contracts is really a key part.
Yeah.
That's the other issue that so often with the administration that's a frustration for us is Secretary Granholm. The issue when there's push, he'll say, well, just go out and drill. These are long-term, multi-million-dollar projects. LNG train, it's $1 billion, but you can't just do it that way. And you need certainty. You need regulatory certainty. You need to know what's going on. Yeah. And when you throw that into confusion, it makes the ability of any company in the United States to want to invest harder. One of the, I know well in the offshore, we've talked about it, the stability of the U.S. system for so long has been one of the bedrocks. You know what the royalties are. It's not going to change government to government. The regulations are going to be fairly solid. You throw it into confusion and chaos, and it makes trouble for everybody.
Yeah, and that regulatory certainty and the ability of investors to predict what the U.S. legal system is going to look like, how it's going to be enforced years into the future has been such a key element of attracting trillions of dollars of investment into the United States that might have gone elsewhere otherwise. And I just feel very, very concerned that we're losing a lot of that now, right? I mean, you combine this decision with, for example, the Keystone XL cancellation.
Mhm.
What, and TC Energy wasn't in violation of any law or statute or permit of the United States at that time. And the president just cancels a $12 billion investment with the stroke of a pen. Well, what does that do to other investors' confidence?
Right.
It's just insane.
No, absolutely. And Mallory is from the West. I'm from Colorado. The other issue that you find is on these Western lands, the impact on local economies.
Yeah.
In Wyoming, in Colorado, that interplay of production on federal lands with everything else going on, it's devastating for communities when the administration, and they don't seem to care at all. It's really a challenge that I don't believe the federal government should be doing that. Now, you always have it's a dynamic relationship. We understand that. But when you're looking at the impact on jobs in the communities, what's happening to these small towns, they just don't seem to care. And the answer is you'll find something else to do or leave. And
Right.
that just doesn't make any sense to us. There's a much better way to get there that would help everybody.
Right. Right. Exactly. Well, we're running against time. I want to, though, before we cut this down, let everyone know where they can find IPAA, follow what you're doing, get involved if they want to get involved, letter writing campaigns, that kind of advocacy stuff with your group.
Yeah, so IPAA.org is our website. We also have energyindepth.org.
Oh, yeah.
There are rapid response media arm that kind of pushes back against some of the misinformation out there. And we'd be happy to talk to anyone about membership. We've got a number of different committees. It's really easy to get involved in, and truly we need everyone. We need your expertise and to help us advocate better for you to members of Congress and the administration.
Any closing words?
I think the only other thing I would say is energy voters. Even if you're not a member of IPAA, understand as Americans how important this is. We're at an inflection point with this election. Be informed, understand what's going on, and be an energy voter across the country.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks a lot.
The great folks at IPAA, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. We'll talk to you again soon.